So tonight we have a really interesting UX panel for you. We'll introduce everybody here in a second. The theme tonight is talking about user experience and how to integrate user experience into design, business, development. So we'll go from there. So if everybody would take a really quick minute, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you work, and your favorite thing to do outside of your job. And we'll start with you.
You're looking down at me, huh? I'm Bill Baker. I'm the digital director at Bray Ward, a creative marketing agency here in town. We do all kinds of digital executions that are out there, from websites, mobile apps, pretty much anything you can think of with the Pixel. One of the things that Berman actually asked us to talk about too is about how do we integrate UX into our teams. Sorry to jump ahead on that, but I was going with the question.
That's fine.
Whereas a creative agency shop is a little bit different than a typical UX experience thing, because we think of things not just about wireframes and architecture, but we think about how users interact with their brands and how they work within the digital ecosphere. So it's a little bit of a different look at UX maybe. Favorite thing to do outside the office right now is to spend as much time as I can with my 8-month-old daughter. So.
Very nice.
I'm Jen Downs. I work for MailChimp. I'm the Dean of Bananas over there. So I do user testing, QA, I write the help documents, research, whatever the user mentions might suck, I take a look at and see if we can make it not suck. So I work for MailChimp, and we're a web app. We are obsessed with the user experience, from everything from our brand down to our support team. There's probably not anybody in the company who doesn't know what it is, because we just talk about it so much. Outside of work, I'm in a band. Shock. And I play bass. That's what I do.
I'm Patrick Quattlebaum. I work for Macquarium in Atlanta, also office in Charlotte. That's Macquarium, not aquarium. A lot of people think we have fish. We're a user experience consultancy, and we work with companies all over the country. A lot of our work is trying to tie business strategy to user experience strategy, but we really do full life cycle user experience work. I travel a lot as a consultant, so my spare time is whatever my wife says I need to do when I see her.
I'm Rick Catlow. I work for Bank of America. Primarily, I work in the mobile space. I'm a mobile user experience designer, primarily on the visual side. Also do some interaction. And I'm also an artist, so I like to paint when I'm not at the bank.
My name is Ron Edelin, and I'm creative director at MyJive, this lovely space here. MyJive is a digital experience agency, so we are more on, similar to Bill, on the advertising spectrum of the user experience initiative, really more brand focused in that end. The other new sort of component, and hopefully I can add value to from the gaming side, is I'm also recently become partner to a gaming company called Umoto, based out of here in Charlotte. So on that spectrum of it, we're really diving into platform games, mobile games, social games, stuff like Farmville, Mafia Wars, those type of things. So a lot of the user experience and game theory, we've been doing a lot of research and work in, so hopefully some of that might influence or play along. My spare time currently, it changes, different flavor of the month. Right now it's playing a lot of games. I have a kid on the way, so a lot of that, my spare time is actually going to the preparation of that.
So this is our panel, and we're glad they came out tonight, because they are very awesome and very smart people. So I think we'll learn a lot tonight. So let's dig in and talk UX. So how would you all define user experience? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We've talked about it in the past and in previous meetups. But how would you all describe it?
Simple answer. I think it's just good design with empathy. I think you need to empathy for the user. And incorporating user feedback into your design process. So it's a really simplistic answer, but in essence, good design practices with empathy for the user.
Very good. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
No, I think Rick is really on it. I mean, like the way we see UX is definitely it's like how do you help somebody achieve the goal or the action that they want to achieve? It's just not how pretty it looks, just not how well you message it. It's really understanding the actions they need to take to get to where they're going. So you have to consider that in your design. So, yeah.
Very cool. Anybody else?
Oh, I think the way I often think about it, a lot of it's about building a relationship. So, like when you guys bring up brand and user experience, I think that's relationship building is a core piece of it, and understanding there's a human that you're designing for, and adding as much or more value to them as you're asking from them, and building that relationship. So it may be a company to a person, it may be a person to a person, it may be, in a lot of design, it's a person to an object, but you're trying to build that relationship and affect someone emotionally as you do it.
Okay, very good. That's Aaron Walsh over MailChimp. That's one thing he talks about a lot that I really enjoy. Is he talks about designing for humans, and a lot of the things on MailChimp is like that. If you've ever been in their application and actually used it and played around with it, they have a lot of they have a lot of bells and whistles that don't really do much, but they're really entertaining. Like if you stretch out the monitor.
Right. If you stretch the monitor out past how wide a HTML email should be, the monkey's arm pops off and he screams.
I think that's
in
awesome.
A little thought bubble.
Little blood spatter, his arm breaks off. It's great. So I mean, they have a lot of interesting small things like that bring some kind of emotion out of the user as a user application.
Right. And if you don't like the monkey, or if you feel like he's clippy or something, you can turn him off, but you have to enable party pooper mode. But you can turn the fun off, but you have to admit that you're a party pooper first.
Yes, and that is awesome. So, what would y'all say are some consequences of not integrating UX, not using UX at all, just not caring?
Bad products.
Bad products, yeah.
Yeah, by default, it becomes a bad user experience because no matter what, there is a user experience going on, and if you ignore it, it's just bad or mediocre.
I have two components to that. I think the first one is do you integrate UX into whatever initiative you have? Is the first question is, before you even start the user experience, is the product or solution that you're creating useful? Is it actually, does anybody need it? And so I think you got to step back and say, and this happens a lot in the ad agency world and the sort of brand initiatives where, you'll work with a brand and say, I have this initiative, go do it. And it says, okay, well, let me squeeze UX into that. And you have to sort of stop back and say, well, is that initiative actually useful? Even if I applied UX, is it going to do anything? Is there value there? Is it going to be received? And then the second part of that is really actually comes out of Umoto and sort of a lot of the games that we're trying to play with. We actually tried to apply UX to the experience and felt that it was very restrictive in innovation. And that a lot of times it's just good to just not care and just start doing stuff and throwing things out there. And you can argue that UX is a process of fail often, succeed faster. But it's a very loose and open. So a lot of times applying a stringent UX process can be very restrictive.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think of UCD and UX as synonymous, and they're really not. I mean, as you said, the experience is going to design itself. Even if you never do anything about it, there will be an experience. Right. And there's things out of the UCD toolkit, and there's out of lots of different methodologies that you can pull from to craft an experience. And sometimes you push the envelope, you take risks knowingly. Right. The thing is, do you know you're making these conscious, explicit decisions, not just kind of winging it, right?
Right, exactly.
I think, there's a Henry Ford quote. Basically, if I asked people if they wanted faster horses, I forget the quote, but
yeah, if I would have asked people what they wanted,
they would ask for faster horses. Yeah. So I mean, there's this whole idea of some people don't know what they don't know. I mean, so you can't just ask users to design. The whole process of UX is not to ask users to design something for you. It's just to get feedback when you have something that is designed. It always has to be sort of put back into the framework or through the designer's back through their eye. I mean, it's not for the user just to design stuff. And that's really, I think, a difference between like what's UCD and what's sort of user experience. I mean, you can't just, I think getting user feedback is important, but it has to always be distilled back through a designer's eye.
So, money tends to be a really big piece of what people care about most. They're going to waste or spend this much money on to do this or integrate this. So when you're working with clients, for example, for the consultancy folks, or if you're working with, in large structure like the bank, and you're trying to convince the powers that be that they handle the money, how do you explain that the return on investment that it would take to incorporate UX into whatever they might need?
I could start here. I think it's a tough thing because it's hard to quantify. I mean, like you said, to bring data. I mean, if you can get data around specifically, there are certain business models and certain things that are easier to justify. If you're dealing with something that somebody has call centers, or there's ways to justify things based off of like failed interactions. If you have failed interactions, you can justify the cost, but and also like the business model. If the business model is very service oriented, it's likely that the people are going to buy in to what you're trying to do. If it's sales, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get them to buy into certain things and to sort of put forth that effort.
Yeah, I think first it's talking to them on a business level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whether you've got data to bring to the table or similar problems that you've solved or others have solved that can be tied back to some business case, talking to them at a business level about trying to understand how they're going to measure success. You can trace all of those endpoints back to somebody interacting with them through what you're going to design, right? Then you just have to help them connect the dots of, to reach that goal, we have to understand this person on the other side. What, within the constraints of what you're trying to do, and we can give you some advice. We've been in situations where the budget's been too small, and we can help them make a better business case. We've been in situations where the budget is like, actually, we could even use a little bit less, and you can use part of it for this over here. It's really talking to them about the business problem they're trying to solve and building their confidence that you can connect these dots for them that they can't.
When you're working with clients, for example, how do you go in when you're first starting up a project and specify the user experience needs that the project needs? What are some of the processes that you go through to define I guess that initial conversation, that initial requirements documentation?
One of the things that my job made a big move 3 months ago was hire a digital strategist. It's his sole role is to, before the onset of any project, analyze the validity of what the project is, analyze all kind of competitive, any kind of data that we can get a hold of prior to the launch of it. And that data essentially is free. It's just scouring the internet for what type of similar related platforms are out there, what are people saying about similar related objects. So it's, from a cost perspective, having a strategist or a person in place who can spend their time focusing just on that can really leap you forward and give you a lot of insights going into the project and making some of these decisions. So and that's the great thing about the digital world. It's everything is measurable, everything is trackable, and it's becoming even more so and easier to do it and more accessible to get that data. So it's from an agency standpoint, it's having a person in place, a human resource in place who can actually dedicate their time to doing it, and that's been the biggest drawback. And so, I think as an ad agency, as a marketing agency, even a consultancy, to have that person dedicating their time to understanding, what has gone before, not trying to reinvent the wheel, and seeing where there are gaps, how it applies to this new situation, and where there can be innovation. But it's all quantitative. It's all very much driven by data that you can, scour down, and you're not guessing. You're not, making any decisions. And that all happens before you even sketch, before you even, open up Photoshop or OmniGraph or whatever tool you're using.
Yeah, a lot of it depends on when you're coming in on the process.
Right.
So, a lot of the companies we work with have this other world of strategic planning. And then they have execution arms. And the execution teams are catching stuff at almost at the business requirement level. And at the strategic planning, there really isn't a lens of, they might be using some marketing data, they might have customer research, but they're not really pulling in and using any methods from user experience or UCD toolkits to craft requirements. So if you're coming in really late in the process and there's a requirements document, it likely is business requirements and may have already gone through some sort of either explicit or implicit dialogue with technology of what they think they can do. And now you're in this box, and the worst documents will literally say it's a page, and the page has this on it, and you're reacting to it. And you may be in an environment where you're part of the team, you're in house or an agency, but you're coming in at this point, and it feels like this painful peeling of the onion, like you're trying to back them up in the process. And experienced user experience people always come back to why, because we know there's some repeatable things that we can do, and the earlier you get them in the life cycle of product and service design, the better off we'll be, right? So competitive research and understanding users, looking at analytics data, et cetera, et cetera. There's like 5 or 6 things where you could just slot them anywhere in the life cycle, but the sooner you do them, you're reducing risk, you're increasing precision, and you're going to actually piss less people off, because I think all of us ask those smart questions wherever we come in the process, and we can spot the gaps immediately where people have made assumptions on poor data, or just have not looked at it through that lens of the user.
So here's a question for y'all. How many people in here work, I guess, something you would classify as very corporate? I do. So very corporate. So for the corporate folks, this question's for you. So when you're in a big corporate environment, what role can UX play in that environment? If UX doesn't exist, how could someone like myself or somebody else in the group that works in a corporate environment that doesn't have UX start working that into the process?
I can interject here a little bit. I think asking why questions a lot. I mean, you kind of mentioned that. There is this tendency to get that we need this page for this, and it's like, well, what are you trying to do? And then you back them up, like you said.
Why are you trying to do that?
Yeah, why are you trying to do that? So, I mean, it's asking why, but I can't tell you how many times you'll have to play teacher, UX 101 kind of, and not to be sort of demeaning or anything. It's just that some people are just not aware that there are people behind the glass, that there are other people that are actually people using this products that we make, and I think constantly bringing that point up every time that some guy wants the big red button, the sort of the two competing business guys who want the bigger, badder thing, constantly bringing up whether this is accomplishing the goals that they need to do. And that's really, it's sort of like Chinese water torture. It's the only way to do it. It's like to do it slowly over a period of time. You can't do it instantly.
So, once you have a product up and running, it's out, it's live, what are some of the best ways that you can do to keep user experience involved after the development's already done, after the product's already live?
We are really driven by our support team as far as that goes. So we have a couple of contacts in support who gather up information and talk about common problems. Our community managers around the web look out, and we actually have like a ticker where we know maybe this piece of it is a little tough to understand, and so every time somebody mentions it, we just kind of check it until it hits a certain point. It goes up on our like actual pain board, whiteboard, and then I'll do some tests on it or research it myself and try to break it and see kind of where that is. But we're really driven by what's coming in to us, and so we just keep testing the application over and over through those methods.
So for the folks that work a lot with the UI designer side of things, what are some of the best ways to integrate the UI folks in the development process?
I think for me, and I think we touched on this the last UX meeting, was for us, it's really been thinking more on a content strategy perspective than it is an actual design process. A lot of the work that we do is driven by the content. So the content is king. We're just building an interface to serve this content or navigate the content. So from a user interface, it's really been shifting information architecture into this kind of content-driven methodology. So we before we even think of an aesthetic or think of an interface, you have to think about what's going to be housed within this area. So step number one, working with a designer, even with is really having that strategist, the person who understands the project the best, carrying through. Okay, here's the content that we're working with. Is that content right for that page or that section or that area? And I use content as being copy, imagery, a form, functionality. What is the actual touch point or the meat that the user is engaging in at any specific point in time? Is it the right placement for that? Is it the right time in this linear process, whatever that might be? So really mapping out whether it's sketching, whether it's, again, wireframing design, understanding the content and being able to experiment with the arrangement and the different way in which I might interact with that content prior to thinking about the aesthetics.
Okay. Very good.
I mean, for getting UI designers and developers together, I mean, and if you have the ability to have a pattern library, component library, that's a natural collaboration point where you're balancing the interaction design with the reusable code and documenting that, especially if you have large development teams and design teams that need to have consistency across touch points. To really do those right, you need both of those skill sets contributing to the library. And it's a point where you can then look to mature it, and as you get in more data and pain points of maturing that library together. It's something that if the teams own it together, then that's an obvious point of collaboration for them.
All right, very good.
So you're talking about like a template system that you have. Here's a drop-down form. It's going to be the same every time. Drag, place it.
Yeah, I mean, you can get it's granular. There's different levels of granularity, but it's you call it at a module level. Okay. So if you always want this interaction to work the same way across all these different pages and maybe even sites,
right.
Creating the documentation. First of all, studying the patterns together and determining here's kind of our baseline for this calendar module.
Right. Okay.
So let's develop it once, and then as we go through the design process, it's not to be a slave to consistency, but one of the things that helps user experience teams and development teams be innovative and solve new problems or harder problems is not to reinvent the wheel on things they've solved before.
Reuse.
And so that library can be really key to that. Can break you out of that cycle.
Yes.
Yeah, and then to extend that, there's a lot of tools to use. Like OmniGraph will have some plugins where you can quickly drag and drop these different preset mods, which we use a lot, and then you can create your own via InDesign or whatever it might be. So having the designer create them while sitting with the developer, saving those files out into templates that you can constantly re-reference. So then doing it again, the process is much faster because you already have those templates to pull from.
One of the things that's not so much on the sort of execution of work, but I think helps to bond, because the designers want to do what developers do sometimes, and developers want to do what designers want to do. So they want to kind of learn what each other does. So if they could do doing skill swaps, I actually at my previous job I'd do that constantly. I'd want to learn something, and somebody would want to learn from me. So we'd go back and we just I'd teach them one thing and they'd teach me another, and we'd go back and forth. So I think encourage that type of culture of sharing back and forth is also something that's very helpful.
Well, one thing on that, kind of to tangent even further away, one of the things you start seeing, at least in the creative agencies of the world, if you look at the shops like RGA, Big Spaceship, this type of thing, it's the idea of the new creative team. The old creative team, so most people understand, is in the agency side of things is usually like an art director or a visual person and a copywriter. Well, now it's evolved into an art director, visual person, content or copywriting, user experience, and what they're calling creative technologists, or technology, if you will, on that point. So not only UX, but if you start to think about all these groups working together and collaborating and thinking about what the experience could be, not only from the initial look, feel, but you go into development, prototyping, everything, you can leverage all four of those types of disciplines together and kind of bring them all. So it's just not development and UX. It could be visual content, UX, and development.
Hybridizing.
Very good.
Yeah, we kind of do that. We've actually started having a UX rep for our different development departments. So we have somebody who really talks a lot to the mobile team, somebody who talks to the app team, stuff like that. So, and then we kind of all bring it back together in our little open office space and just talk about what's going on. So it's kind of cool.
Very cool.
I like the term creative technologist.
I like that. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Who is that person? I got to meet him. He or she.
They've been around for a little bit. I was fortunate to go to a conference in New York last week, and they had the VP of Creative Technology from CPB, Crispin Porter-Bogusky, famously known for Caesarean chicken, not to throw that way back. They've done a lot of stuff since then. But what they do is they actually bring their creative technologists into, I know this is a UX discussion, and they actually go into and work with the UX person, work with the visual person, and prototype some ideas. What can you do? What can we not do? Oh, give me 2 days, I'm going to go work something out. And they come back together and they throw it all together. So, all right, I'll bring it back now. So.
But it's that one person that can carry, traverse throughout all and try to bring it all together. Even if you can't be in the same room together, it's at least that consistent person that can carry it. Yeah.
Exactly. So, on the web, there are lots of different, positions that make up the whole. So that there are user experience designers, there's information architecture, there are the back-end developers, front-end developers, the visual designers, the BAs, and customer support. Lots and lots and lots of other positions that help make a product or a service successful. So with all these different positions and different people, how should they be integrated into user experience, and at what point?
Wow.
Think away. And I understand it may vary depending on project and company. But in
Yes,
general,
that's the answer.
Yeah, it varies. All right.
What's the budget?
What's the budget? All right, we'll skip that one then.
Oh, well, I mean,
Unless I think
in a
something.
perfect world, everybody be involved at every stage.
Mhm.
That would be the ideal, but it becomes a sort of human resource issue. Ideally.
Right, and it may vary even within the same organization. It may be by project.
Right.
And I would say that's one thing is in having built teams in the past, building a team that you can have a good combination of specialists and generalists so that you can right size the team for the project. Because the reality is not every project should have the same process. Not everyone should have the same deliverables, and everyone's going to have the same team members. You have to feel confident you're building a team and partners who you feel you can put together in the right combinations. A lot of the challenge is your process of identifying, sizing the project. And what type of project is this? And what are we trying to achieve as a business? So what's the right level of effort to put against this, and what type of deliverables, and a process about categorizing that project so that you know how to staff it with the right kinds of people. So it could be one person who can do a lot of different things. It could be 20 people. The key is you got the right size team and people know their roles and responsibilities on that project.
Very good. I like it when people talk about specialist versus generalist. It has a special place in my heart. So what is your preference? Is your preference to work with or be a specialist, or to work with or be a generalist? Which is better? Which is worse? Why?
This was the generalist or specialist was the topic of I think it was an AIGA event last month, and every panelist had a different answer, and it's just this continual battle. As a designer, as a graphic designer, do I focus in print? Do I focus in web? Do I focus in motion graphics? And it's a struggle. Even if you look into each one of these different disciplines of the role that makes up this whole user experience, even within these, there's specializations that you can go deeper in as a designer. Do I go into 3D interfaces? And so I think that my answer to it is you're going to be the best you are if you're passionate about it. So if you're going to generalize, then that should be sort of rooted to your passion of wanting to know a lot, But if you're really stoked and into programming, then you should focus and be in that, because your passion is going to drive you to be the best at it. So my answer is really it's based on the individual. So where your heart is, that's what's going to answer that question for you. And then even within that specialty, where do you go from there? Because it can get very granular in terms of how focused you can be and how good at a specific thing. We do a lot of 3D here, and just in 3D animation itself, there's probably 50 different specialties. There's a guy who models, there's a guy who textures, there's a guy who does the bone structure of the characters, and it's each one of those tasks is incredibly challenging and requires a couple of years' experience to get those things down. And we have one 3D guy who's responsible for knowing it all, and I get mad when he doesn't. So, but it's. At any level, in any topic that you want, specialty is sort of a broad term as well, because you can get really, really focused and really good, or if you were to say, I am the best in the world at this thing, you have to be very, very specialized. So again, it goes back to it's individual, and I really say if you're trying to figure out what you are, find your passion, and that will guide you there.
Very good.
Sometimes it's necessity. I moved from New York, and I was a specialist. I was a visual designer. And moving down here, I felt I had to have a little bit more of a generalist field because it's a smaller market, and learned, became much more, adept at coding. And I just felt like that would help me sort of, help me fill in a lot of gaps when looking for work. And I think I think this is a tough thing. If you're not extremely talented as a specialist early on in your career, it's hard to get started. So I think when you're younger, I think it's good to be a generalist in practice, just so you have a lot of bases to cover. But then hone in on something that you could really refine and sort of become really a craftsman at.
Do you think user experience? If I'm director of user experience, do you think that's a generalist just by its title, or can I be a specialist in user experience?
I don't know if you can. Well, because
you need to know a lot of different things.
Well, yeah, user experience encompasses.
Yeah.
But as far as it relates to the disciplines within that what you talked about, I think there's a lot of. It's hard to be great at all of those things, but to hone in on a couple of those things. I think to be generally understanding of those disciplines, but to really hone in on one over time, like you said, that you're passionate about is a good way to go. But in your earlier career, I think it's important to be generalist.